Hello everyone! In today's video, we're going to be talking about color theory. More specifically, color mixing, properties of color, and how to pick colors for your next project. Most of my examples today are going to focus on resin casting, but also much of what I plan to talk about is applicable across many different art mediums, so even if you don't pour resin, feel free to stick around. To start, let's just talk about color. There are a lot of different, ever-evolving schools of thought when it comes to color mixing. In school, we're usually taught the RYB model, which is that the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. That's not the only model, though. In fact, when we use this red, yellow, blue model, we tend to end up with some more muted colors, especially those greens and purples. In recent years, there's been a lot more of a push towards the CMY model, which is cyan, magenta, and yellow as our three primaries instead. After all, there's a reason that those are the colors of pigments that come in a standard printer. When we use cyan, magenta, and yellow as our primaries, we end up with a broader range of more saturated colors. Neither of these systems is actually able to do all visible colors. Personally, I feel like even though you can technically mix red from magenta and yellow, it doesn't always have quite that same quality of the classic bright red color, and the classic red and blue combo doesn't make the most saturated of purples. I bring this up because it's useful to know what pigments are actually needed to get the colors that we want. The most basic of color mixing is just combining our primaries together in different combinations to get secondary colors. In the case of the red, yellow, and blue, red plus yellow equals orange, yellow plus blue equals green, and red plus blue equals purple. Or in the case of the cyan, magenta, and yellow, cyan plus magenta equals blue, magenta plus yellow equals red, and cyan plus yellow equals green. We can then mix the secondary colors with one of their neighboring primaries to get our tertiary colors, and so on, until eventually we have a color wheel of all our mixed colors. Say you want to mix two random colors though, and not just two primaries, and you kind of want to know what that's going to look like. Let's say this lime green color and this orange. I find that when it comes to mixing, it can be useful to think of colors in terms of their base primary colors. Since we can make red and blue with our CMY wheel, let's use that for this example, although it might be easier to think of it in terms of red, yellow, and blue, since that's the way most people are taught. This whole exercise is just to help get a rough approximation anyway. The hope is that as you mix more colors over time, some of this might become more intuitive, and mixing more specific colors will come easier. So if we have a lime green, we can break that up into roughly one cyan and two yellows. And for the orange, we can say one magenta and two yellows. That's a lot of yellow, but our color's not going to be just yellow. We've got other bits in there too. So what we currently have is one cyan, one magenta, and four yellows. And cyan plus magenta plus yellow is like black or dark brown. So what we really have is one dark brown color and three yellows. So I bet we're gonna end up with a somewhat muddy brownish yellow color. Yep, see? As you try out this method, you might find it useful at some point to start thinking about adding white or black in your breakdown as well, especially with pastel or more muted tones. Another way to think about muted tones is with complementary colors. Colors opposite each other on the color wheel, also called complementary colors, or a combination of all three primary colors, cancel out to make a black or dark brown when mixed. Now this can come in handy when you want a slightly more muted tone. You can just add a tiny bit of a complementary color to give a more natural and less bright feel. Or it can be useful when you're trying to break down what makes up a color. But it can cause problems when you're mixing things and want to stay bright and saturated, but don't realize you're actually mixing complementary colors. It's something to watch out for. Alright, we've talked a little bit about mixing pigments together to get colors, but there's actually another way to mix colors. And this brings us to one of the main differences between resin and a lot of other mediums like painting or clay, and that is transparency. Okay, there is ways to use transparency to affect things in painting and clay, but just go with me here. So if something is transparent, that means we can see through it, which means that if we have more than one color, we'll see the color in the back through the color in the front. This is important because overlapped colors are mixed colors. If you have something yellow with a red filter over top, when you look at it, it'll appear orange. It's good to keep this in mind when working with multiple colors of resin. As mentioned before, complementary colors mix to make brown, so having a, say, swirl of transparent orange and transparent blue together won't read as orange and blue, it'll just look brown, and a swirl of cyan and yellow will appear green. Your resin color can affect how inclusions look too. If you've got blue resin with gold flakes in it, those gold flakes might end up looking a bit green in your final project. Another thing to keep in mind when working with transparent resin is that the thickness of the item you make will affect how dark the color of it appears. Think of the color as tiny particles of dye within the resin, and this makes sense. Imagine a pane of glass with 5 random dots on it. If you only looked through that one pane, you'd just see 5 dots. But if you then add another pane of glass behind it, now you're seeing 10 dots. Another pane, 15 dots, and so on. Likewise, the thicker the resin gets, the more layers of pigment you're seeing. Now that we know a bit more about how colors work, how do we actually decide on colors for our projects? It's important to keep in mind when picking colors what design or technique you plan to do. If you're going to be using a technique that causes your colors to mix a lot, like in dirty pours or projects with many transparent layers, using too disparate of colors will leave you with brown. If that's what you're going for, then great, but if not, you might want to pick colors that will mix well for those designs. If you want to use drastically different colors, you'll probably want to pick either a design that facilitates keeping those colors separate, or find a workaround to help in keeping the different colors separate in your project. Like using a split cup instead of just a straight dirty pour, adding some sort of transition color between the colors that they both mix nicely with, or making some colors opaque. My best piece of advice when it comes to picking colors is to make test pieces of all of your colors. There's 2 main reasons for this. The first is that pigments can look very different from how they do in the jar once actually in cured resin. And the second is that it makes it easier to place colors next to each other to decide what colors look good together and to see slight differences between them. One of these potential slight differences is the warmth of the colors. Colors are generally split into 2 groups: warm colors and cold colors. The warm colors are the ones around like red and yellow and orange, think like those of a fire. And the cool tones are blues and purples and greens, like the colors you might see in like a body of water. Along with each color being warm or cool, each color can also have a warm or cool undertone. So the undertone of a color is like a secondary color that the main color has kind of been slightly tinted by. What direction does the color lean towards, so to speak? Colors that tend to lean more blue tend to feel cooler, while colors that tend to lean more red or yellow feel warmer. So say you have a green color. If it's more of a yellow-green, it might feel warmer, while if it's more of a blue, it'll feel colder. With red, a more orange red will feel warmer, while a more purpley red will feel cooler. I tend to prefer warm colors with warmer undertones and cool colors with cooler undertones, except for blue, which I like to be warmed up a little bit, just because they feel a little bit richer to me for some reason, but that's very much a personal preference. I just think it's good to know what you like so you can make intentional decisions. I do think that undertone can be a good way to help tie colors together. When picking colors for a project, I tend to try and pick all colors with warm undertones or all cool undertones to help them feel cohesive. That's not a hard rule, of course, and there's plenty of other ways to tie a series of colors together, but that is one way to do it. Picking colors from the same category of colors, or colors with similar saturation and lightness levels, is another way to tie things together. I've had people in the past ask me how I make sets of dice where every die is different, but all of the dice still feel cohesive, and picking colors from one color category is one of the main ways that I do that. There's many different groups that colors can be split up into, but here's just a few main ones and some of the associations that can be made with each one. Bright and saturated colors are what we think of as the base versions of a color. This makes them versatile and useful within many different color palettes. In general though, they feel fun, energetic, and bold. Neon colors are even brighter and saturated. You will not find a dark or muted color here. Because of the increased brightness and boldness, they feel even more fun and energetic than the base bright colors. They're so fun and energetic that they might even come across as a bit crazy or zany. Jewel tones, some of my favorites, are darker but still saturated colors. Jewel tones, along with the classic metallics like gold and silver, have a more elegant and classy and regal feel to them. Pastel colors are ones that have had a lot of white mixed into them, so they're a bit less saturated and very pale in color. They tend to feel cute and calm and soothing. Muted or desaturated colors, along with neutral tones, tend to feel more natural and not as in-your-face as more saturated colors. Muted colors, depending on the context and what they're paired with, can feel very rustic and natural, or more classy and sophisticated. Again, there's no hard rule saying you have to stick to just one color category. Sometimes it's helpful to add something completely different to add a point of interest in your project, or you may want to focus on something else to help tie things together. For example, instead of focusing on a color category, or perhaps after you've chosen one, you might want to choose a color scheme to help tie everything together. You don't necessarily want to use every color within a color category in your project, so it's time to narrow down which ones to use. I'll talk about color palettes in a minute, but color schemes are a way of choosing a smaller collection of colors methodically with a color wheel. There are multiple classic schemes out there that I'll let you look up for yourself, but here's just a few of the basic ones to get you started. Feel free to use whichever color wheel you'd like, but keep in mind that different wheels will get you slightly different collections of colors. A monochromatic color scheme is one that contains only one color of various lightnesses and darknesses. Working in only shades of blue would be an example of a monochromatic color scheme. An analogous color scheme is just slightly more broad, as it's made up of colors next to each other on the color wheel. For example, red, orange, and yellow-orange could be considered analogous. Analogous color schemes are great for when you want multiple colors, but don't want to have to worry about the colors mixing a bit. A complementary color scheme uses two colors directly across from each other on the color wheel. Complementary colors tend to pop when placed next to each other, but when mixed together make brown. Blue and orange would be a great example of a complementary color scheme in the RYB wheel, or magenta and green would be one on the CMY wheel. A triadic color scheme is one in which three colors are picked from evenly spaced points around the color wheel. These colors might be the three secondary colors, for example. On the CMY wheel, that'd be blue, red, and green, or on the classic RYB wheel, purple, orange, and green. Having a color scheme in conjunction with a category of colors can make for quite a unified and harmonious palette of colors. The color scheme is how you pick your colors, but your palette of colors is the actual final collection of colors that you'll be using. Coming up with a color palette can be much less of a science than just using color schemes, though that's not a bad place to start. Many color palettes are collections of colors that people pulled from specific inspiration, or have just decided look nice together. I personally like to create my own palettes from various references, like things in nature, such as sunsets or the ocean, or from various pieces of media. If you don't have color palettes at home though, store-bought's fine. There's tons of places to find color palette ideas online. Some people make whole collections of them for people to use as inspiration. If you're not sure what colors you want to use, looking up color palette ideas from other people can be a good place to start. Here, I'll even post some right here for you. Feel free to use any of these. There's so much more that can be said on the topic of color theory, but that would take hours, so I'm gonna wrap things up here for now. Ultimately, I'd just say go for it and try things out. See what you like and what works for you and what doesn't. Everyone's going to like something different. If you're not sure what you like, take a look at what people around you are making and try to figure out what you like about those things. Or draw inspiration from something you enjoy or want to emulate. You guys are always welcome to try recreating the designs in my videos. And if you ever want a second opinion, my Discord server is in the description and is filled with people, including myself, who would love to see what you're working on. Hopefully this has been a helpful introduction to mixing and choosing colors for your resin projects. If you'd like to hear more about a specific aspect of something I talked about, or a different area of color theory that I wasn't able to get to in this video, let me know in the comments. I'd also like to take a moment to thank my wonderful patrons. These are the lovely people that make videos like this possible. Your support's greatly appreciated. Thanks for tagging along on this video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye!